Your role doesn't align with our future strategy, said Deshawn, sliding the termination packet across the glass desk without a flicker of emotion. My name is Malik Carter. I'm 52 years old, and until yesterday morning, I was the senior operations manager at East Point Systems, a company I helped grow from a scrappy little local supplier to a national leader in industrial logistics. For 20 years, I was the guy they called when things broke down, when shipments were delayed, when clients screamed at midnight because their inventory didn't arrive on time. I was always there, reliable, steady, the fixer. But here's what they never saw: the sacrifices behind that reliability. I missed my son's high school championship game because I was stuck in the warehouse, overseeing an emergency reroute. I spent my wedding anniversary, our 15th mind you, sleeping in a hotel room across from a client's distribution center because a key shipment had gone missing and I couldn't leave my team stranded. While Deshawn and the other suits upstairs kept climbing the ladder with their fancy MBAs and polished LinkedIn profiles, I was on the ground floor, managing chaos with my own two hands. No one taught me how to optimize supply chain metrics. I learned because I had to. They called me old school, like it was an insult. But when systems failed, they didn't call their consultants. They called me. Over the years, I built something most of them couldn't even comprehend: relationships, trust. My word was good enough to keep clients loyal even when prices fluctuated or timelines stretched thin. But none of that made it into the quarterly reports or the slick PowerPoint decks they paraded around investor meetings. No, all they saw was a salary number next to my name. And to them, that number had grown too big. I could feel the change, months ago. The side glances in meetings when I spoke up. My name disappearing from project emails. The whispers about efficiency initiatives. But I stayed quiet, kept my head down, kept doing what I always did: solving problems. Because that's who I am. That's what I do, or that's what I did. When I first walked through the doors of East Point Systems, we were barely more than a glorified local freight broker. 6 people crammed into a rented office above a tire shop with second-hand desks and a single printer that jammed more often than it worked. But I didn't care. I saw potential. I saw a place where someone like me, who didn't have the fancy degrees but knew how to get things done, could make a difference. Those early days? Man, they were tough. I remember personally loading trucks in the dead of winter, fingers numb from the cold, just to make sure we hit deadlines. Back then, we didn't have software managing our routes. We had me, a map, and a Sharpie, but we made it work. Slowly, our reputation grew. 1 loyal client turned into 5, then 10. By the 5th year, we'd expanded to a proper warehouse, hired more staff, and I was officially made operations manager. I wasn't just running logistics. I was building systems from scratch, creating processes that could scale, training teams who had no idea what this industry even required. And the culture? Well, it was family. We celebrated birthdays in the break room with sheet cake and bad coffee. We pitched in when someone's kid got sick or when a delivery driver's truck broke down 2 states away. We had each other's backs. But that was before the investors came in. Before the consultants with their efficiency audits and talk about maximizing shareholder value started circling like vultures. Still, I kept believing in what we'd built. I thought loyalty meant something. The first sign was subtle. They moved my desk. After nearly 2 decades with a corner office overlooking the loading docks, the same spot where I could keep an eye on everything, they shifted me to an interior cubicle tucked between accounting and HR. No explanation. Just a polite email. From facilities saying they were reorganizing the floor plan. Then came the new hires. Young, fresh out of college, all talking about disrupting logistics and data-driven workflows. They didn't ask me how things worked. They just walked in, armed with dashboards and buzzwords, acting like they'd reinvented the industry overnight. And Deshawn, he stopped looping me into meetings. Suddenly, I wasn't on the email chains for client onboarding or operational reviews. Vendors I'd worked with for years were now getting calls from some 20-something analyst with no field experience. At first, I told myself it was just the natural order of things. Maybe they were lightening my load, giving me space to focus on higher-level strategy. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was being phased out. The final gut punch. They hired a new director of operational excellence, a title they invented out of thin air who reported directly to Deshawn. A guy named Tyler, no older than my own son, who introduced himself to the team by explaining that he was there to modernize legacy processes. Legacy. That was me. The living, breathing version of the systems he wanted to streamline. Suddenly, projects I'd overseen for years were reassigned. My reports were being audited for efficiency gaps. And when I walked into the break room, conversations would fizzle into awkward silence. People who used to come to me for advice now avoided my gaze, like my very presence made them uncomfortable. That's when I knew. They weren't asking for my experience anymore. They were waiting for me to leave. After they cut me loose, I didn't make a scene. No angry emails, no desperate pleas for reconsideration. I packed up my things, the old coffee mug my daughter gave me when she was in 3rd grade, the framed photo of my wife from our anniversary trip to Savannah, and, of course, the flash drive. See, what Deshawn and Tyler didn't realize was that I'd been documenting everything. Every system update, every vendor discrepancy, every efficiency report that didn't add up. Not out of spite, just habit. Years of managing chaos taught me to keep records, and I kept those records off-site, encrypted, safe. The first call came 3 weeks after I left. One of the junior analysts they'd promoted was panicking, something about the warehouse routing system crashing in the middle of peak season. I ignored it. Then another email. A vendor threatening to pull out of a long-term contract because their invoices were suddenly all wrong. By the time the 3rd call came, I didn't even bother checking voicemail. They thought they could replace me with algorithms and PowerPoint presentations, that modernization was just about software and dashboards. But they forgot that the real infrastructure wasn't just in the systems. It was in me, my knowledge, my relationships, my instincts. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. And while they scrambled to put out fires I used to handle before my morning coffee, I sat on my porch, sipping that same coffee, watching the sunrise and thinking to myself, they really have no idea what's coming. About a month after I left East Point Systems, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Clarence, the COO at Vanguard Freight Solutions, one of our fiercest competitors back in the day. He didn't waste time on small talk. Malik heard about what happened. We need to talk. We set up a meeting the very next morning. Over black coffee in a quiet downtown cafe, Clarence laid it all out. Vanguard was expanding aggressively, and they needed someone who understood operational infrastructure, someone with real experience, not just a certificate from an online supply chain course. You build East Point, he said, leaning in. Everyone in the industry knows it wasn't the C-suite or their consultants. It was you. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. It wasn't just about the job offer, it was about the validation, the acknowledgement of what I had known all along, but what my former bosses had refused to admit. Clarence wasn't offering me a position. He was offering me authority, autonomy, the chance to build something again, but this time without being shackled by short-sighted executives chasing quarterly targets. As we shook hands, he added one more thing. We also just picked up one of East Point's largest clients. They say your absence has caused some real headaches. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. That afternoon, I officially signed on as Vanguard's new Director of Operations Strategy, with full control over the expansion plan across 3 regions. And when East Point's operations started to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance, the calls came in. Deshawn, Tyler, even the CEO. People who once dismissed me like an outdated spreadsheet, now leaving frantic voicemails asking if I'd be open to consulting, or even returning. I didn't return the calls, not out of spite, but out of principle. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. It didn't take long. Within 6 months of my departure, East Point Systems was a mess. Orders delayed, clients furious, vendors pulling out left and right. The once smooth operations I'd spent 2 decades refining had become a tangled, unmanageable disaster. I heard through the industry grapevine that they tried bringing in more consultants, outsiders who didn't understand the company's DNA, let alone the complex web of relationships and processes that kept it running. They threw money at the problem, restructuring departments, firing and hiring in a desperate bid to stop the bleeding. But it was too late. One morning, while reviewing expansion plans at Vanguard, I got an email forwarded from an old contact at Eastpoint. Attached was a legal notice. Eastpoint was threatening litigation, claiming that I'd taken proprietary systems and client lists. I laughed, because here's what they never understood. The systems weren't proprietary, they were mine, built on my knowledge, my methods, my processes. And as for the clients, they weren't lists, they were relationships built on years of trust and integrity. I forwarded the notice to Vanguard's legal team. Their response was simple: let them try. Meanwhile, Eastpoint's last-ditch efforts to claw their way back only made things worse. The junior staff they'd promoted couldn't keep up. Tyler, the so-called Director of Operational Excellence, resigned under pressure. Deshaun was quietly reassigned to another division after a major client defected, ironically to Vanguard. I watched all of it from a distance, never once needing to raise my voice or seek revenge in the traditional sense. The collapse wasn't my doing. It was theirs. They built the perfect storm when they decided I was expendable. It wasn't until months later that I learned the full truth. An old friend from the industry, someone still on the inside at Eastpoint, invited me for lunch. After some small talk, he leaned in and said, "Malik, you know your termination wasn't just about cost-cutting, right?" I raised an eyebrow, waiting. Turns out, Deshaun and Tyler had been planning my removal for over a year. They'd pitched it to the board as part of an aggressive modernization strategy. But what they hadn't shared, what they kept hidden, was that they'd already cut backdoor deals with one of Eastpoint's biggest competitors. Apparently, Deshaun had lined up a VP role for himself at a rival firm, while Tyler negotiated a lucrative consulting gig on the side. Their strategy: push out the old leadership, tank key client relationships, and create just enough chaos to justify an acquisition offer. But they didn't account for one thing: me. They thought I'd walk away quietly, leaving no trace. But my documentation, those records I kept off-site, all of it now painted a different picture. Fraudulent invoicing, misrepresented efficiency metrics, falsified client retention projections, every manipulation they orchestrated, carefully laid out in black and white. When I realized the depth of their scheme, part of me wanted to confront them, to send a message, to expose it all publicly. But I didn't. Instead, I handed everything over, quietly, professionally, to the regulatory authorities and to Vanguard's legal team, who had a vested interest in ensuring their new director of operations wasn't dragged into Eastpoint's corruption. It didn't take long. Within weeks, Eastpoint was under investigation for corporate misconduct. Deshaun's shiny new VP offer was rescinded. Tyler's consulting deal vanished overnight. Both of them faced formal charges for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate fraud. And me? I stayed quiet. Let the system handle what it was designed to handle. For the first time in my career, I realized something profound. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The truth handled that for me. Starting over at Vanguard Freight Solutions felt different. Not because I doubted my skills, I never had, but because for the first time in decades, I wasn't walking into a place where I had to prove my worth. Clarence made that clear from day one. "Malik, you set the pace here, we follow." So I did. I rebuilt their operations with the same care, precision, and integrity that I'd brought to Eastpoint. But this time, without the corporate politics or the undercurrent of disposability, I handpicked my team, focusing not just on technical skills but on character. People who understood that logistics wasn't just about moving boxes, but about keeping promises. Within a year, Vanguard expanded into 2 new markets, with efficiency metrics that outpaced industry standards by nearly 30%. Clients who'd once been loyal to Eastpoint, who left after I did, were now calling me, asking how soon we could onboard their accounts. But here's what meant the most. Every member of my new team respected me, not because I'd been around the longest, or because my title demanded it, but because they saw what I brought to the table every single day. Experience, integrity, leadership. I wasn't chasing promotions anymore. I wasn't covering for executives with hidden agendas. I was building something real, something sustainable. And the culture? It wasn't some cold corporate machine obsessed with quarterly reports. It was a team built on mutual respect, shared goals, and an understanding that good work doesn't just happen, it's led by example. Looking back, I realized that everything I went through, every late night, every overlooked contribution, every betrayal, had prepared me for this moment. Not just to survive, but to lead. The right way. About 18 months into my role at Vanguard, I got a call that made me lean back in my chair and just laugh. It was from East Point's new interim CEO, a woman named Meredith who'd been brought in to stabilize the wreckage after Deshawn and Tyler's disgraceful exit. "Malik," she said, her voice polite but heavy with unspoken desperation. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of you leading an integration of operations across both our companies." Turns out East Point was negotiating a merger with another firm in a last-ditch effort to survive. But they lacked the leadership, the systems, and frankly, the trust to make it happen, and they wanted me to fix it. The irony wasn't lost on me. But here's the thing. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the need to rub it in or remind them of how they discarded me without a second thought. I just asked one simple question. Would I have full authority to make decisions based on what's right, not just what's profitable? There was a long pause on the other end. Then Meredith said quietly, "Yes." I thought about it for a moment, not because I doubted my ability to pull it off, but because I'd promised myself that I'd only lead teams where integrity wasn't optional, so I set the terms. Full operational control, non-negotiable protections for every frontline worker affected by the merger, and absolute transparency with the board. When they agreed, I accepted, not because I wanted revenge, not because I needed to prove anything, but because, for the first time, I could shape an organization from the top down, based not on politics or personal ambition, but on values. This wasn't about power for me. It was about purpose. Walking back into East Point Systems felt surreal. Same building, same glass doors, even the same receptionist, though now she greeted me with wide eyes and a hesitant smile. But this time, I wasn't carrying a cardboard box of personal belongings. I wasn't being escorted out by security. This time, I walked through those doors as the new Chief Integration Officer, leading one of the most complex operational mergers in the industry. No fanfare, no dramatic speeches, just a quiet nod to the people who once avoided my gaze in the break room. Tyler's old office, empty. Deshawn's nameplate, long gone. The boardroom where they fired me, now, it was where I led strategic sessions, laying out clear, pragmatic plans to rebuild what they'd nearly destroyed. But I didn't waste time on nostalgia. While others tiptoed around, wondering how I'd wield my new power, I just got to work, restructuring processes, stabilizing client relationships, mentoring managers who'd been left adrift by their former leadership. There was no need for arrogance, no need for revenge, because here's the truth. The best revenge is competence. And as I walked through those familiar hallways, calmly overseeing the very systems they once claimed I was too expensive to maintain, I realized something simple but profound. Time doesn't just reveal character, it rewards. With the integration complete and the company finally on stable ground, I knew it was time. Time to stop building systems and start building people. So I made a decision. I launched an internal leadership program, not some corporate workshop with slides and jargon, but a real, hands-on mentorship initiative for the next generation of operations leaders. Every week, I sat down with young managers, analysts, and floor supervisors, not to lecture, but to listen, to share what 2 decades of hard-earned experience had taught me, how to navigate crises, how to lead with integrity, how to balance ambition with accountability. I wasn't interested in creating more executives who chased quarterly numbers at the expense of long-term stability. I wanted to shape leaders who understood that trust isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in warehouses at midnight when the shipment's late and the team's exhausted. But you show up anyway. That's the legacy I chose. Not revenge, not a title, but people. And long after I eventually step away from this role, I know one thing for sure. The systems I built might be updated, the strategies refined, but the values I passed on, those will endure. I've learned something over all these years. Real value doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to announce itself in boardrooms or plaster itself across quarterly reports. It just endures quietly.